Okay, friends, we're in office hour. We're going over the Pokemon API. Question is why are we not getting all of them? Why are we just getting 20? So we're going to look at this a little bit and also look at the documentation. And that's what I want to kind of dive into. First off, the question of why is there sometimes a limit? Well, we can actually, so there's two things. Either that limit can be kind of set by the API itself or the owner, right? And saying, hey, with each query, you can get a max of 20. That way they're not getting and iterating through, or you're not getting a whole bunch or all their data, right? It can kind of jog it up or jam it up if there's too many requests at the same time, right? It just depends on their rate, depends on their server, how it's being hosted, all of that stuff. So they might do something where they prevent you. The other thing that you might see in the platform is this thing called a query parameter. Um, and this is something that I like to, I don't know that we talk a ton about, but I like to set it up because I got, when I went and worked for a company called Twilio, this was part of my job, was to go through query parameters. And this was not part of my job. This was part of my interview process for me to even get hired on at Twilio. They gave me, they basically said, write a function that takes in these certain query parameters or takes in a query or call that has this information. I want you to extract that and then get the certain information that we want. And so what a query parameter is, and you might see this, is after here's our URL, right? So we have this base URL, usually to like V2, and then you have Pokemon, or you might have had, if you did like the Star Wars, there was planets, there was people. Well, after that, you might see some sort of information after the Pokemon here that might look just kind of like what is going on, but it's a way that we can actually pass information into like into our browser or into our actual request itself. Some of those are like limit, so you can limit 20, you can do certain parameters that way. But it allows us to kind of look through some of this information. So if you do ever, if you're messing around with APIs and documentation and you see that it says, oftentimes it is like caps. So to say like limit equals 20. If it says something like that after, then you're saying, hey, I want to limit, or in this request, I'm only asking for 20. So if you only want a 10, obviously you just go in and you can adjust those. There's other query parameters as well. If you kind of just, as you're gazing through and you're going on, especially when you click on a link, this is a really huge way for advertising and for marketing. If you're on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and you click on a link, even your phone, and you click on a Medium article or, Vox or Fox or CNN or any of those, oftentimes there's what we call UTM. So it'll kind of give you, there's different parameters that have different pieces of information. So like UTM medium is how are people looking at this data? How are people, or sorry, how are people making this request? And so if you are on a phone, they want to know, oh, are most people looking this up via phone? Did they go through Instagram? What are the avenues? And the whole point of that is so a company can get that information. It's huge for marketing, right? You're able to garner that information. And then you say, okay, great. Now we know most of our traffic is coming through an application or an iPad. So maybe we need to make like an iPad application, right? If you're a news outlet and most of your stuff's coming through an iPad, but you don't have your own dedicated app, you might say, hey, look, 80% of our stuff is coming through an app, but it's not really, not really usable, or the readability is not that high, or the engagement to keep them on our app for ad revenue is not that high. What if we build an application? So there is something called a query parameter. That's not the issue here. The just based off looking at your query here, the other thing it could be is that the actual API itself has just set the limit of 20 unless you say more, unless you do some sort of like Pokemon slash all, right? And so they might have a setup or a specific route that will then go get you all that information. So if you want to pull up maybe the Poke API docs and we can just look through that. Any thoughts or any questions on any of that? Trying to find a spot that can.
What happened here?
That's not it.
Doesn't say. I don't
That's
think
not
that's.
Yeah,
it.
exit out of that. Just Google Pokemon API.
Yeah.
All right.
Perfect. Yeah, there we go.
There it is.
Okay. So see, let's actually just stop right here. You see, this is what I was talking about. Let me draw this guy right here, where we got this Pokemon. Then in order for us to pass off our query parameters, you do a question mark. And then you can pass off some different things like limit. And this one is okay, 100,000, right? Maybe 10,000. Yeah, 100,000. Offset, if you think about Bootstrap, where do you want to start from, right? And so you can pass off a bunch of information to kind of get these specific results that you want. So these are the query parameters. Again, you don't have that. So let's see if we can look through the docs. So let's go here and check out the docs. And sometimes they have just at the very beginning, they'll kind of see what are some information. So this is consumption only. Paul, I know that you said that there was a limit of 20. Is that in the docs? If we're looking, will we be able to find that? Or do you just know that offhand? I keep scrolling, yeah.
That's just when you run, like when you ask
Okay.
it to fetch Pokemon, it
Yeah.
only gives you the first 20 Pokemon.
Yeah. So right here, right? And this is why getting to know how to read documentation is important. So it's calling an endpoint without a resource ID. Will give you available resources. By default, a list or a page will contain up to 20 resources. So if you'd like to add, then you add a limit query parameter to the GET request. So if we wanted to add more, let's say we had Pokemon, right? Just like you have, all we have to add is this slash question mark limit, and then let's do 40 and see if we can get 40. So slash question mark. Yep. So then the question mark, you're good. It's hard to do it in front of everybody. Then we go limit.
Sorry.
And let's equal 40. Yep, with no spaces. Perfect.
Okay.
Now let's save this and let's go try to run this. Melody.
There you go. Yeah.
There we go. So it was just a fact of by default, the app doesn't allow that, or the API. And if you read it kind of at the beginning, it was saying, hey, some of this might be kind of hindered based on current requests, our current availability. There's these things called load balancers that in the cloud allow you to, it allows to kind of migrate traffic. And so if there's a bunch of traffic coming from here, it kind of says, okay, go to this server, this server, this server. You kind of think of traffic control. Like if a light goes out and you have somebody directing traffic, load balancers kind of work that way. But then, but at the end of the day, they might say, hey, like we have too much, so we're going to slow everything down and throttle you. So getting to know docs are going to be really important.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Great question. Cameron, did that help you?
Yes. Yeah. So I found that when I just looked at the solution for the page, where I was wondering how to find that on the documentation was what I was struggling with.
Yeah. Yeah. And like Paul said at the very beginning, it's pretty hard. Documentation can be scary. And so you're still sharing, by the way. Philip, just a heads up. Documentation can be really scary. And so
sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to not share. I
no,
got
you're
rid of that little
good.
bar.
You're good. Here, let me see if I can.
Just kick me out if
I
you
got
can.
you.
There you go.
I got you. I'm going to pause the recording too. Okay, we are back to recording. And this time we are talking about use effect and how to really use that and what we can do with use effect. So again, it is a hook. You might hear it described as a side effects. Side effects are really just something we can do, obviously, on the side. So the power of use effect, as we kind of talked about last week in class, is that we can set a condition. So if count changes, then on the side, this is what I need you to do, right? I need you to kind of handle this. If count changes, this is also what I need you to kind of run. And we call that a side effect. Really, you just think about it. It is at a high level. It is a hook that allows us to run some code based off some condition. That really is all that use effect is going to be. We are going to use it primarily for when we are using or calling an API, then we are going to use effect to, at the very beginning, we saw kind of at the beginning of today's office hour when Philip was going to Pokemon, right? And had this API call. Philip used fetch. We're going to use Axios today. But had this API call that, let's say we wanted to go and our entire program was, we wanted just to, once our user logs in, they want to see all Pokemon or all 40 that we called. Well, we can use a use effect and say, great, once this happens, right? Once this, does anybody remember what it's called when, like, when is this going to run? When this component is what? Anybody remember? You're like horse. When it's mounted, right? So when the component is mounted, meaning that our DOM has this component on it, then it runs this code because we have this dependency array that is empty and saying, once this is mounted, then we go ahead and run this, right? You can sort of think about it like this. Actually, I think this might help. I'm going to try to get to an empty page. Yeah, we'll just go to source.js. Let's come here. We have talked a lot about kind of how a single page application works. So here's my page, right? And then we've talked about the power of components and how with components, I can do certain things, right? I can have a component here. I can swap out component here, right? Here's my nav bars. This is kind of us redoing the Coding Dojo platform. And then here's my content, right? And then based off of what page my user is on, so maybe this is my use effect content. So if I come here, this is my use effect content right here, right? And we can tell it's just, this is what kind of is our pathway to give this specific content. But whenever I click on Axios, this changes. Therefore, I want to get a new piece of information, meaning that I no longer want this piece of information. Let's say that this was my use effect. Let's get it out of here. And then now what I need to do is I need to add my component or my piece of information about Axios. And so maybe that goes right here, right? And so again, the whole point of a single page application is it allows me to, based off of my user's actions, take this information, move it, and maybe add on this. They go back to use effect, cool. When this code, when our user wants to go to use effect and this component gets added on to our DOM right here, boom. That is what we call our code being, or our component being mounted, right? It's now on our DOM, our virtual DOM. And so now it's mounted. And then when it's mounted, it will run if we've got, let me clear my drawings. Now that it's mounted, we can see it, and then it doesn't change because at the beginning we said only when it's mounted. Now we've talked about if something were to change, like if when we had count, or if we had some sort of thing that was going to be updated and it needed to run every time that got updated, we'd put that in what we call our dependency array. But for right now, we just are worried about when it gets mounted, here's what we're doing. Or when I go to this dashboard, I want all my API or my Pokemon to come up. So let's go build that real fast. This is our class one. We can just kind of build off of this today. Components. So I'm going to have a Poke dash .jsx. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow me to just get some information for my I just want to get all that base information. So we're just going to use the Pokemon API. Cool. So I've got my component here called Poke Dash. Great. Now I'm not doing anything yet. We'll just have an H1. I need to go ahead and add it into my app.js. Let's go in here. And then I'm going to say Poke Dash. Poke Dash. And then I need to import Poke Dash from components. Cool. So now if I were to run this, I should just have this H1. So if I CD to client, npm start, I should just have an H1 that says Poke Dash. Should load up here in a second. Oh, it's on my other one. And it just says Poke Dash, right? Perfect. Now, if we wanted to have, and I'm not going to talk about APIs yet because that's what we're talking about today in class. And so it doesn't, I'm not going to talk about it in office hour and then have to re-talk about it in class. Only because I don't want to confuse you guys. I want to be able to actually talk about it and then we'll go through that. But all useEffect is doing is within this, if I wanted to, I got to first import it. So import useEffect. Yeah, I'll end up using useState anyway. Perfect. That's fine. So now I'm going to say useEffect. This is a hook, right? And we're just going to console log. This is fine. Now, what this does is when this is refreshed, what it will do, because this is our dependency array and it is empty, this is automatically going to run. Now, I could have a piece of information or an API call in here. And then whenever this is mounted again or refreshed, and all a refresh does is it goes and then remounts everything, right? To say, okay, now I want you to run that API call again. Right now, we don't have that because, again, I haven't taught you guys Axios. But if I were to look at this and I were to inspect my tool, I'll go to console and it says app is running. Now, if I refresh, I get app is running, right? Because upon the mounting of this component, then it runs this code. If I said something like const sure, let's add this, and nothing's going to happen right now because if I say Pokemon, this is only going to run when Pokemon is changed. And so it might run at the beginning because Pokemon is created. Let's see. Yeah, so it runs at the beginning when Pokemon is created. But if I were to do something else, unless Pokemon changes, unless I run this set Pokemon, this is not going to run. So it's only running now because this is mounting and then it's creating Pokemon, right? And so then this has changed. So then therefore this gets ran, or this gets set and then this gets ran. But all useEffect from a high level does is based off of either this condition changing or upon the start, which is really what you're going to do a lot of. I don't even know that for the belt exam, you need to handle like the dependency array and something changing. It's really if you can do this, right? And have this dependency array and saying, cool, when this starts or when this happens, I want you to run some sort of code. So maybe if I go to useEffect and I say Pokemon API, let's see. Seeing if there's an API I can call that you guys already. No, I don't have any. Oh, and maybe we'll just take this. Okay, I'll just walk through this, but we're gonna walk through this during class. But instead of doing fetch, we're gonna use this tool called Axios. And it's because Axios handles it and gives us returns a different sort of response than fetch does, which is very helpful. And so let's say that we wanted this to do something like this, right? I wanted it to say, I need to go and install Axios. Cool. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to bring in Axios up here. And then what I'm going to say is axios.get, because I'm getting a GET request. Remember, we talked about HTTP verbs. And this is getting all of them. So I'm just going to say limit 20. And I notice if I don't even say limit 20, that's the default. So I don't even need that code, right? And so what this is doing, I'm going to set, well, let's just console log. And then catch. Oops. Perfect. Okay. So what this is doing, and I'm not going to get into the actual code because obviously we're going to talk about that today in class. So I refresh. Cool. I am getting a piece of information on the mounting of this code, right? If I look at my components, I'm already in my inspect tool, go to my components, we'll be able to see that I don't have anything in state because set Pokemon should be results. So, no, why is that? Yeah. So here I've got this state, right, of 20. And so based on when I refresh this, perfect. When I refresh this and that mounts, right, reuse effect automatically runs. And because it automatically runs, then it goes and it fetches my API, gets our information, sets our state, and then we're able to now do something with it if we wanted to. And so the whole idea behind use effect is if I were to update this and I wanted to get an updated version, but I was still on this same thing, right? Think about how you kind of had to-do list and you wanted to get rid of something. The way we did it was you had to use like the filter and then you then reset state to the filter that didn't equal the index. What you could do here or updating it is that you maybe get rid of that piece of state. And then when this changes, or when you delete something, then you want to run this again and get the newly updated version. If you wanted to get all friends, if you wanted to do something like that, you can handle and put that there. So the whole idea behind use effect, it is a way that we can on the side. Oh, I see that now it makes sense to you. And I'm just still talking, but on the side, if we wanted this to do something, use effect is a hook that allows us to run some code upon loading of our component. And really what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, I want to get this information. And this is going to come in handy when we are going to like one Pokemon's page. If I had that information, right, then I want to go there and see just that Pokemon. But when I get to that page and we route, which we're going to do today, then what we can do is just grab that Pokemon's page before my user even gets there. Once that mounts, say, yeah, let's go ahead in my database and just grab this Pokemon's page.
Will, what is a hook?
A hook. That is a great question. It's a great movie if you've ever seen it. I'm just kidding. A hook is a set of tools within React that allows us to do certain things. Use state, we've talked about a couple of them. Use state is a hook. It is built-in methodology, really, that is the foundation of a lot of the functionality behind React. The two that we're really using are use effect and use state. There's like use reduce, and then there's a couple different other ones to handle state globally. But there's other tools like that. If you're going to handle state globally that way, I would use something like Redux versus necessarily a hook, or just the hook, the native hook. But because you'll see, one thing I guess you guys can know because you're in here. One thing to note is with Axios, it's really simple. We make this request to our API, and then it gives us this piece of information. This is what we call a promise within JavaScript. And it gives us this piece, this response. Well, the reason we use Axios over fetch is because Axios goes and it bundles up, does all this code behind the lines, right? This is just getting the get method within Axios, bundles it up and gives us this really nice response, right? That I can read. It's JSONified. It's an object, right? It's a JavaScript object notation. It's already done, so I can just console log it. And this is my response. This is what it gives me. Here. Cool. Here's my response. Oh, looks so nice. Now, I know it seems trite, but if we are dealing with fetch is not that. It's a little bit older. It's still super popular, and we're going to teach this in week 7 because I want to show you that there is other ways to do it. This is when we'll do component based, and when we do like we'll do instead of functional components, we'll do class components, and then we'll use fetch instead of Axios, just to show you guys that there's totally different ways to do things. But you get this response, and then oftentimes you have to JSONify, get this JSON, then do another dot then, which is another promise, and then we can kind of handle it however we want. Axios just does that for us. So on the first one, we can just say, hey, I want to do this. Here's what I want to do. And then you're good to go. If you didn't have more than one thing to do, so in this case, we have console log and set Pokemon, you actually don't need these curly brackets. Just like this, right? Because that's part of our power of our arrow function. But because we wanted to console log and set Pokemon, you have to have the curly boys.
Does dot catch always in response to an error or something going wrong?
Yeah, so the way it's going to work is, and I met with 2 people today, and it was a great class. This is a promise. I'm going to talk about this in class for sure. To where this is what we call a promise. And basically it gives you, well, a promise can do quite a few things. But really it has 3 stages or states. It's got pending, which you're not really gonna use a ton of, especially in this class. You won't even touch pending. But you have resolved and rejected, meaning basically you tried something and either it's going to say, nope, that doesn't work, or yes, that's fine. Everything was good to go. And so if you look at a promise here, I'm kind of teaching this. I'm going to teach this exact same thing in class. It gives our resolve and reject because we're not handling the pending yet. Gives a resolve and reject. And really, it's just got some condition. It's really sort of, you can think about it like a function. And basically, it's a conditional function to where you say, hey, if this is the case, then give me a resolve. Like, yep, everything is good, or else, nope, things are not good. There's an error. And so our dot catch is always going to handle our error. Now, what's nice though is you only need a 1 dot catch. Like even with Axios, you can chain dot thens, and anytime there's an error within that, boom, it goes into your catch, and then you can say, hey, here's an error. Here's the error that happened.
Awesome.
So catch is kind of like if you've ever used try catch, or there's a couple different, different languages. There's different ways to do things, but yeah, catch is always kind of like your catch-all, which is kind of nice. Yeah, and Paul, like Paul said, React will never break a promise. It's kind of funny. Yeah. Any other questions? There's some great documentation here on promises as well. A promise is really used because just like we talked about the Pokemon API, whenever it said, hey, it might be throttled, right? We don't know, especially if we're dependent on another person's process. We're dependent on another company's API. We're dependent on another company's data or whatever it is. They could be getting hammered with requests. We don't know. And so what this does is a promise, instead of waiting for this to be done and then our code being slow because it goes like line by line by line by line by line, what a promise will allow you to do is say, hey, while this is running, because we don't know how long this is going to take, we know that we will eventually get a response back, but we don't know how long it's going to take. So then while that's happening, other code can run. So any code can run after it's free. Yeah. So it can run kind of asynchronously.
Will, are promises inherently asynchronous?
I don't believe so, Paul, right? Or are they?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I thought they were, but they behave kind of like async stuff.
Because I'm trying to think, because I know with async and await, we can do a fetch. And we can do await with a fetch, and a fetch gives a promise. But we're waiting until that's done. So yes, it is asynchronous unless we want it to wait and say, great. So based off of and we're not going to talk about this for a very long time. Till week 7. It's like past the full stack MERN stuff, I think. Is system hooks, is it advanced JS? There's an async await section. Maybe it's in here. Where basically async await allows us to say, hey, so yes, I think you're right, Paul. It is inherently asynchronous, meaning that things can run on the side and we will have to tell it to wait. If we want to say, great, I want you to do this, then once I get this user, I want you to run this code. We can say, well, we want you to wait for this code to be done and then go ahead and run the next thing. So yes, I believe it can. It is.
I like it.
Trying to find where it's at though. Advanced MERN maybe? Oh, why there's too many advanced MERN sections. I'll have to find it, but we're not talking about async and await until week 7. I think it talks about it. Is it? I thought I saw like an async and await. Swimming APIs maybe?
Yeah, I was gonna say
Yeah,
maybe.
there it is. It says await. So yeah, so this is the async and await, and this is basically saying, hey, before you do anything, I want you to do this. Yeah. So yes, Paul. Yeah. Any other questions on that? I mean, if that didn't make sense, we're gonna have an entire class on it, so we'll run it back. If not, I will pause the recording here until there's another question.
I have a question.
Mhm.
About the use effect. Can you go back there?
Yeah, of course.
And like, do we always need an empty arrays as a second primary?
So you have to have something here. You don't always need to have that, right? So we had also talked about you could do something like this. Oh, I mean, that's fine. It doesn't. So I'm going to say const count set count use state is 0. And then I could do something like this. Use effect equal use effect. And I want to console log count has been updated. And so let's say that I have a button in here that once this button's clicked, we are setting our count. We're running set count, right? And it's going to go up to my state and it's just going to grab my current count and it's going to add 1. Right? So my count's going to start at 0. It's going to add 1. I click it again. It's going to grab the current count, which is 1, and add 1, making it 2, etc., etc. Well, this use effect has a condition in here, right? And this is the idea of how it's a side effect and saying, hey, I only want this to run when this changes. So if I were to, so that my code's saved, that's still running. So that's always a good sign. Come here. Now I've got this button. I don't have anything. I've got count has been updated, and that's only because when it's mounted, it gets mounted twice because of our index.js, our strict mode. So that's why we have that. But that's because count was created, right? And so it ran that code. Now, if I click this, you'll notice, and I guess this is a great example. You'll notice that we don't get another, it does not run our Pokemon, right? Let's get rid of this index. It doesn't run this because this only runs when the page is changed or mounted, but it's already mounted, right? But this one is only dependent on the count. And so what I can do is I can say, click me, and we notice this is not going to change. They're not going to add this again, but we will get a count has been updated. Boom, count has been updated. I click it again. Count has been updated. You notice this does not run this because this is only when it's mounted. This is the most recent. Like if I were to go like this, perfect, right? So here's the most recent. If I click this use effect does not run the Pokemon one, only the count, which is this guy. And so use effect does not have to be paired with an API. But if we do it here, it will only run when the page is mounted, when the component is mounted. Here, if we want it to change on that, if we want to change like on this click, then we can do that as well. And this will only run when this state is changed. And so in this case, every time set count is run. And that's why we never put set count in here. Because if we put set count in here, then count's going to change. And it's going to run this, and it's going to see set count, which then changes count, which then runs the use effect again, and it has this infinite loop. Okay. Strict mode's a great, it's like a way to, let's just look it up. It's like a way that when you're testing or you're building something, it is like it's got like different tools in it. But why it runs it twice? Let's ask all powerful. Why does React in strict mode console.log twice? Let's see. Double rendering of components. So looks like as this, it helps with potential warnings and issues of the application. So as you're building it, then you can kind of get some of these like, hey, this might be an issue, but then it double renders your components, which means anytime that's mounted, that's happening, right? So it's doing it twice. So that's why. There we go. There you go. That's why. Great question. I did try Bard today. Not near as good as ChatGPT. But alas,
That's Google's endeavor into it.
Yeah, it's not even remotely close. So it's kind
It
of
doesn't
funny.
use the same tech like behind the scenes. Is it GPT-3?
No, this is a large language model for OpenAI, which is Microsoft, and then
Okay.
Bard is
Right.
Google, and it's based off of like the internet though, so that's where the power from Bard could come. But then now GPT-4 is powered with, or Bing is powered with GPT-4. So let me stop sharing and stop the recording.